Tell me how the subject changes when you tell exactly. Communicable. No, I'm a big fan
Most everybody that makes money is when I came up here.
I would be horrible right now. I know whenever
I think they're absolutely good.
I just wanted to welcome you all on behalf of the Robert Strauss Center for International Security and Law. I'm Ashley Moran, and also on behalf of my colleagues from the Macomb School, Dr. Mahajan is over there, and also Deidre Mendez, who is not with us today, but
She's traveling.
she's what?
She's traveling.
She is. So, but she did an extraordinary amount of work as well in helping organize this on behalf of the Center for International Business Education and Research at the Macomb School, and also on behalf of Anjali Zucchi, who organized us all and bringing us all together here.
I think we should give her a big hand, actually.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, and thanks to each of you for coming. This is just such a testament to the urgency of these issues and to the power of the message in Rahul's work, that it draws such a diverse crowd from so many different disciplines and areas of expertise. So we're just thrilled to have you all here. So our discussion today will be, as most of you know, or this is your alert to bolt if this is not the lunchtime discussion you were looking to hear. We'll be talking about conflicts in South Asia with Rahul sharing his frontline perspectives and personal story. And you know, as you all certainly already know, Rahul is an award-winning journalist, winning the International Red Cross Award for conflict reporting in 2010. He has reported from the front lines in areas as diverse as from Iraq to Sri Lanka. His book that he's going to talk with us about today, Our Moon Blood Clots, was just published this year. And he has also previously published other critically acclaimed books. Hello Bastar, The Untold Story of India's Maoist Movement in 2011, and also The Absent State last year. So, you know, I think it goes without saying, but I'll just say it anyways. Rahul's work, both through his reporting and his books, tackles such a complex set of issues in looking at the tragic consequences of conflict and emerging extremist ideologies, the role of the state, and how all of these factors come together to impact communities. So we're just thrilled to have him here today. And I should just also mention that he also writes for the New York Times blog India Inc. So even after today, you can continue to follow his writing on a regular basis. So we thought for our program today we'd have Rahul talk, present his thoughts and work for 30 minutes or so, and then turn it over to discussion and questions. But before doing that, we thought it would also be helpful to have everybody just briefly introduce themselves. So you can introduce yourselves to each other and Rahul, so we know who's in the room. Does that sound good? Would you like to start?
Okay.
Put you right on the spot.
Okay, I'm Sadaf Munshi. I'm associate professor in the Linguistics and Technical Communication Department at UNT. I'm also a graduate of UT, so I'm really excited to be here.
I'm Abe Reina. I'm an undergraduate student here in biomedical engineering at UT.
I'm Keshav Bengali. I'm a professor in the computer science.
I'm Eric Hurst, and I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Programs, the MBA here at Macombs.
I'm Kamran Ali. I teach in the anthropology department.
I'm Gail Hino. I teach in the history department.
Bob Jensen, I teach in journalism. Steve Reese, I'm in school journalism also.
I'm Saif Shaheen. I'm a student at the School of Journalism. I'm Michael Dodd. I'm an adjunct faculty member here in the MBA program.
Bob Hardgrave, retired member of the Government and Asian Studies Department.
Patrick Oliver, I don't teach. Retired this year from Asian Studies, originally from Sri Lanka. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about it.
I'm Radhakrishnan. I'm Asian Studies.
I'm Herman Van Olfen, retired from the Department of Asian Studies.
I'm Surinder Kaul. I'm a faculty at Baylor College of Medicine, and I'm a physician.
I'm Nalini Shah. I'm a first-year undergraduate student, business and liberal arts.
We met our other guests here.
My name is Bruce Mortimer Shotkin, and I'm the visionary founder of the global business that's getting ready to be launched.
Mianza Spellman, and I'm the founder and executive director of Rainforest Partnership. It's a nonprofit, international nonprofit based right here in Austin. And my connection to McCombs, besides Vijay here, is also John Doggett, who is the chair of my board of directors.
And she just happened to be wife of.
Well, normally I don't say that.
Okay.
No Spellman, but yes. My husband's on the city council.
I'm just embarrassing her. I'm Vijay Mahajan with the marketing faculty in the business school.
I'm Raghu Rao, I'm faculty at Brown School of Business.
Well, that leaves me, ladies and gentlemen. Well, good afternoon. I must say that it's been a real pleasure given this opportunity to share my experiences with you, and I thank Ashley, Dr. Mahajan, and everyone else who has made this trip possible. I must say that I get a little intimidated among academics. I was at the Stanford University just a couple of days ago, and I was speaking on the Maoist insurgency. That's what my specialization is. And I travel a lot in these areas in central and eastern India where the Maoist insurgency is brewing. And it's only then that I realized that there are many among other co-speakers who call that kind of work ethnography. So, well, I've been a journalist in India for about 17 years, so I'm not here to speak to you as an expert or as a scholar, because that is not what I am. I speak to you as a traveler who has traveled extensively in India and other parts of the world and has learned the most valuable lessons of life while traveling through various theaters of war. Now, I've traveled through the jungles of central and eastern India with Maoist guerrillas, through villages where people are so resigned to fate that they think hunger is a disease. I met men and women who went to some of India's best schools and are today running a radical insurgent group that the Indian Prime Minister has recently termed as India's biggest internal security threat. I've been at the site of a bomb blast that killed so many people, and I was so close to it that I could almost taste explosive powder on my lips. I've been a journalist for 17 years, and not a single day goes when you're out there in the field and you do not learn a new lesson. Every day you learn a new lesson, and sometimes very small things completely alter your life. I remember this small incident in Iraq, actually, where I was traveling as a young journalist in the March of 2003. So about 2,500 of us, journalists from all across the world, were stuck in the Jordanian capital of Amman, and we're looking for an opportunity to cross over to Iraq. And most of us didn't have visas, and the borders were sealed. There was no opportunity to cross over. So in due course of time, we would report as much as possible. There would be this constant influx of refugees from across the border, from Iraq into Amman. Jordan also has a formidable Palestinian population, so there would be protests on a regular basis, and you would cover and get a sense of what was happening in the neighboring country. During these travels, I met this young driver. His name was Muhammad. He was of Palestinian origin, and we kind of forged a friendship, and he would come to my hotel every day and take me to wherever I wanted to go to cover some of these protests, etc. And there was a lot of time to kill because there was not much happening except these small events, protest events, etc. So one day for a few days I heard him singing this really silly sing-song ditty to himself, and it would appear on some radio station also every now and then. It was a silly sing-song ditty in Arabic, which went something like this. Bush, bush, shili dak, hadal hachi mai fidak. So every time I would hear it, I would find it very funny, and one day I asked him what it meant. And he would speak in broken English, and he said this means, Mr. Bush, don't put your hands into Iraq, you'll burn your hands. Days passed like this, we would cover as much as possible, and one fine day, we just got this small window of opportunity where this friend of mine who came from some other country, she bribed the Jordanian border officials, and they said, hey, we'll let you cross over our side of border, but we're not responsible for what happens to you when you reach the other side of border, which is Iraq. And we said, fair enough, we'll figure it out from there. And sure enough, we one afternoon we crossed this border from the Jordanian side called Ruwaishid, and we cross about 300 meters of this no man's land, and right there it's a giant statue of Mr. Saddam Hussein. And suddenly we're surrounded by these Republican guards, about 25 of them, who are wearing those long loose coats with a belt tucked in between, and they're carrying arms. And we picked up a couple of Arabic phrases and words, and we tell them, I speak to the chief, and I tell him that I'm Safi, which in Arabic or Urdu means I'm a journalist. And he asked for my passport, which there are 3 of us, and I show him my passport. Obviously there is no visa there. And suddenly the chief gets very hostile, and they began shouting at me and at the 3 of us, which we thought in Arabic were expletives hurled at us. And suddenly, before we could realize, they started cocking their AK-47 rifles like this. And I look at my friend, and she's a young journalist. The whole blood is drained off her face, and it has gone into her ears. And I look at her ears; they're pulsating like that of a rabbit's. The other person is also very nervous, and I'm not looking at my own legs. Perhaps they are shaking as well. And suddenly, some divine intervention happens, and I started singing this silly sing-song ditty which I had learned from Muhammad a few days earlier. I said, Bush, Bush, Shidi da Khadal Hachi, my fidak. And suddenly all of these, the barrels of the gun come down, the chief holds his stomach and rolls on the ground with laughter. And in the next few minutes, he makes me sing this ditty about 50 times. After which I'm so frustrated, I say to myself, okay, if he makes me sing this again, I'm going to tell him, sir, just put a bullet through my head and relieve me of this misery. Of course, they sent us back to Jordan, but after about a few days, we were able to cross over to Iraq, which is a different story for some other time. But when I came back from Iraq, I realized that I was so stressed that I had forgotten the PIN number of my bank ATM card. Now, it may not be a big deal for many of you here, but it is a big deal for someone like me who has a John Nash kind of fascination with numbers. I remember this Waterworks connection number we used to have at a place, the only place which I used to call home. And that home, ladies and gentlemen, was in Kashmir Valley. The number was 44732. Now I have friends in Delhi who are fellow journalists, and they work for some top-notch publications and TV channels in India. And these are really successful journalists who understand the meaning of words like inclusive growth and trillion-dollar economy. And sometimes they ask me why I put myself through such hardships. But I can't tell them that my empathy for such marginalized people, or those who go through such hardships in conflict zone comes from my own homelessness, my own uprootedness. So that home, whose water connection number I remember, was the only home I have, and that home was in the Kashmir Valley. The home is still there, but we do not live there. It no longer belongs to us. We were forced out of this home on the morning of 4th April 1990. My parents have never been able to return ever since. But I go there regularly as a journalist from '98 onwards. But even when I go there, which is almost every 2-3 months, I avoid traveling in the general direction which leads to my home, because my home now is occupied by someone else. So we are a small community, a religious minority in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and we have been in exile for the last 23 years. And today, I'm going to share this story briefly with you. I'm a Kashmiri Pandit, and we are a small community, like I said, and a religious minority in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And my ancestors have lived in Kashmir for thousands of years, and they've spent their lives in pursuit of knowledge. It is my ancestors who took Buddhism to central Tibet, painting some really magnificent murals on the way right from Ladakh to central Tibet. It is one of my ancestors who translated the Buddhist Lotus Sutra into Chinese, and the Guru Padmasambhava or Rinpoche, who is also referred to as the second Buddha, spent a lot of time in Kashmir drinking from its knowledge reservoir. History is considered a weak spot in Indian literature, but my 12th century ancestor, the scholar called Kalhana, wrote the magnum opus called Rajtarangni in 12th century, which is considered among the world's most extraordinary historical works. Independent India's first Prime Minister happened to be a Kashmiri Pandit, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru. We are everywhere now after the exile, right from Jammu and Kashmir to Johannesburg. Some of my fellow community members are here in the United States. They are space scientists, entrepreneurs, professors, academics, etc. But before I begin telling you this story further, of one particular night in January 1990, I will also tell you why this story is relevant today to most of us here. In 1999, an Indian Airlines flight IC-814 was hijacked by terrorists from India and forced to land in Kandahar, Afghanistan. That was then under the control of the Taliban. Now the government of India chose to negotiate with the hijackers and agreed to release 3 terrorists in exchange of the hostages. One of them happened to be Masood Azhar, who was the founder of the radical terrorist group Jaish-e-Mohammed. He had earlier been arrested from Kashmir. The second one was a Kashmiri terrorist called Mushtaq Zargar, who is responsible for the killing of many innocent Kashmiris, including Kashmiri Pandits. The third one was a man who loved to play chess and indulge in arms wrestling. And he had kidnapped a number of foreign tourists from Delhi earlier and had kept them hostage in a Delhi suburb. And the police stumbled upon him and these hostages when they were investigating a simple case of cycle theft. Now, this person was Omar Sheikh. He was freed as well. So these 3 terrorists were freed as well, in exchange of these hostages. Now, less than 2 years later, as the subsequent US investigations revealed later, that it was Omar Sheikh who later wired about $100,000 to a man called Muhammad Atta. I don't think in this room I need to tell anyone who Muhammad Atta was. A year later, after this event, it was he who planned the subsequent abduction and beheading of a young fellow journalist. His name was Daniel Burke. Now, why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because these are the people, these three men, among others, are the people who are responsible for my homelessness, the homelessness of our entire community. These are the same people who rammed an aircraft into the World Trade Center on 9/11. They are the same people who appear on YouTube every now and then declaring a jihad against the United States and other democracies. They are the same people who send their mercenaries to Mumbai and like to listen over the phone the sound of people being killed. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, I must take you to the Kashmir of the 80s where I was born. That is the Kashmir where there was a coffee house where every person, intellectuals, poets, writers, artists would meet. There was a man there whose name was Jawahar, but he was so much into the works of Jean-Paul Sartre that he would be nicknamed Sartre. And these people would meet there, he would meet his friends and discuss existentialism. That is the Kashmir where foreign tourists would come in hordes and live in these floating boats that we call houseboats. Many of them would be named after their foreign patrons, Alicia, Rosaline, Catherine. It also happened to be the favorite destination of George Harrison, the lead guitarist of Beatles. I recently stumbled upon this photo shoot done by a fashion magazine called Vogue in the 1960s in Kashmir. We had these movie halls where one could go and watch films like The Guns of Navarone or a James Bond flick like The Spy Who Loved Me. When I was growing, elders would sit in a balcony and look at the sky during sunset, when the sky sometimes would turn crimson, and they would say, and there would be these worrying lines on their faces, and they would say, "Oh, I think a bloodshed is happening somewhere." So that is the kind of Kashmir we lived in, where a murder was completely unheard of. I remember people who would come across a police constable on the road and move 500 meters away from him. Today, that coffee house no longer exists. That coffee house was blasted into pieces in 1989. There are no movie halls either, and those who were nicknamed Sartre have been in exile for almost quarter of a century. It all began for us in the autumn of 1989 when we heard these murmurs for the first time that a few young men had crossed over to our neighboring country for arms training. Now we dismissed it. We had a fairly good relationship with our neighbors, with Kashmiri Muslims. There were unpleasant events every now and then. A riot would break out in some part of the state. But as religious minority everywhere else, we would just act like a submarine, keep our head low and hope for things to pass. So in 1989, when we heard these murmurs for the first time, we sort of dismissed them. We thought, this is not going anywhere else. This will be sorted out, and these are just rumors. But by the January of 1990, these rumors had come true, and we found out that there were guns in Kashmir Valley, and they had been brought in to target this small community of ours. So one of our community leaders stepped out of his home in September 1989 and was immediately gunned down. A retired High Court judge was waylaid on the road and shot dead. During these times, we're also getting a lot of signals, but we're just, I think, naive not to understand them. My mother, she worked with the state health department. She was in a bus, traveling in a bus one day, where this man helped an old Pandit lady to get out of the bus. And there were many in that bus who lashed at her, saying that, "Oh, why have you helped this Pandit lady? You should have just kicked her out of the bus." There were other signals as well, and I'm just amazed because after exile we spoke about it, and many of us had similar experiences which we could not put together at that point of time. we would be renovating our houses, and our neighbors or friends or people who work with us, a milkman, for example, would come to our house and say, "Oh, why are you renovating your house?" There would be this smirk on his face. He would say, "Why are you renovating your house? Maybe tomorrow or maybe day after tomorrow, this house is going to belong to us." And as usual, we dismissed it as gibberish. But ultimately, in the January of 1990, they took it away. And that is how, on one particular night in January 1990, is the longest night we have ever faced in our lives. And that is the night of the 19th January 1990. Now, I believe that in the United States, people ask each other, where were you when Kennedy was shot? I think in our case, the Pandit equivalent of that would be, where were you on the night of 19th January? In January 1990, there were about 75,000 Pandit families in the Kashmir Valley, constituting about 350,000 or 400,000 people. That is less than 5% of Kashmir Valley's population. Now, it is in the same month that a Harvard graduate made a very passionate speech in Islamabad. Her name was Benazir Bhutto, and she said in this passionate, rabble-rousing speech, she said that the Kashmiris had the blood of the Mujahideen flowing through her veins. She also invoked the Ghazis. Ghazis in Arabic means the destroyer of infidels. So she invoked the Ghazis to fight a war, fight a jihad in Kashmir. Now in 1990, she had no idea that the same Ghazis would devour her 17 years later. It is also around the same time, in mid-January, when we watched in horror these visuals from the Azerbaijani capital of Baku, where this Christian Armenian population was beaten up, tortured, raped and expelled. But we were still hopeful in Kashmir. We thought, this is not something that will happen to us, but it did happen to us on the night of 19th January 1990. Now, I'm very aware and respectful of a sense of proportion, and I think it will be really unequal to compare our exodus with the Jewish Holocaust. But let me take a minute or two to explain to you that how the night of January 1990 happened, became our crystal now. My family lived in this small neighborhood of Kashmiri Pandits in a suburb in Srinagar. It was a small neighborhood, and there were other localities around, and we never had a problem except these small unpleasant events every now and then. Now in January, Kashmir gets a very harsh spell of winter, and there would hardly be anyone on the roads after late evening. And my family, like most of us, had also retired after dinner, and I was very young. I was just 14 years old, and my mother put me to sleep, and in my sleep I thought I was going through these noises in my head. But then my father woke me up, and I was startled to hear this noise on the road. There was too much of noise on the road. There were hundreds of people, thousands of people on the street below. And suddenly, from all over, these prayers started to be broadcast from these loudspeakers in these mosques from all across. Now we were very used to these prayers from the mosque, because these loudspeakers would be used for airing those prayers, and we were pretty used to it. But that night, these loudspeakers were not used only for prayers, but they were also used for these shouting slogans against us, all across, and a lot of slogans that some of them really scared us. A couple of them went like this in Kashmiri, and I will translate it for you. One of them went, "Batan hun byol khodain gol," which essentially means that the seed of Kashmiri Pandits has been destroyed by the Almighty Lord. The other one, which really got us scared, and it was It was especially scary for the women. They said, "Asigas Panni Pakistan, Batarusti Batninsan," which essentially means that we want our Pakistan without Pandit men, but with their women. So my mother, I remember, and it was very shocking for her. She took out a knife from the kitchen, and she said, I had an elder sister who went to college, and she said that if the crowd was to attack us, she would kill my sister, and she would kill herself, and then the men would need to figure out what needs to be done. Somehow this night passed, and the next day we realized that this is not something that had happened in my neighborhood alone. It had happened in every street, every locality, every district, every village across Kashmir Valley. In other places, stones had been pelted at Pandit houses. At some places, mobs had come out carrying these petrol cans, threatening to burn down Pandit houses. This was all pre-planned, of course, because this was a time when there was no social media around. There were no mobile phones. There was hardly any basic telephony around. The landline telephone density in Kashmir was very low. Now, often I talked about my exodus after my book was out, and after many such events, some of my friends come to me and they say, how did it feel that night? For many years, I could not figure out how I felt that night. Until very recently, I came across this magnificent graphic novel done by this artist called Art Spiegelman, who has done this novel called Mouse, where he interviews his father, who is a Holocaust survivor, and he asks him how it felt to be living under the Nazi regime. And his father startles him by producing a loud boo. And he says that it felt like that, but always. So that is how we felt in Kashmir on the night of 1990. And the exodus really began from next day onwards. The Indian state had collapsed completely. The Indian government failed to protect us. World's largest democracy, that talks about the protection of religious minorities. Nobody came to our rescue. On the roads, processions of hundreds of thousands of people would stream out, and the slogan mongering also kept on going from mosques all over. At several places, some old Pandit men and women were forced to lead such processions. At some places, candy and coins were thrown at us. Now, this is a local custom. When this candy and coin is thrown at a dead person, when he or she is being taken for last rites. So when this candy and coin was thrown at us, it was to signify that we were already dead. In the next few months, hundreds of innocent Kashmiri Pandits were killed, and some of them in extremely brutal fashion. Professors, doctors, nurses, shopkeepers, unemployed, housewives, even pregnant women were not spared. A young laboratory assistant working in a school, her name was Girja Tikku. She was kidnapped, abducted by her own colleagues and neighbors, blindfolded, put in a moving car, gang raped, and cut alive on an electric saw. And then you had public threatening like these. This is self-explanatory. This is issued by a militant group at that point of time called Allah Tigers.
I have a question.
After that. This is another killing decree issued for Kashmiri Pandits. These are some of the letters that were published in local newspapers at that point of time. If you look at this red highlighted, this is all like anti-Semitism in Europe. I claim to be a rational and a non-communal Muslim, but at the same time, I sincerely feel that the Kashmiri Muslims should try our best and thwart any attempt by Pandits to return to the valley. Pandits have been in cancer, and once this cancer has been removed, it should not be allowed to repair. Some of these killings were really brutal. This woman was dragged by a rope with a jeep along with her husband, and she died like that. So by October 1990, because of these selective targeted killings, barring a handful of families, we were all forced into exile. And it was so sudden that it uprooted us completely. We left in whatever means of transport we could get. There were no United Nations trucks for us. We had no idea where to go. We just kept on moving out of Kashmir. And the idea was to somehow escape from Kashmir. And then we realized that we had become refugees in our own country. And most of us, at that point of time, landed in Jammu city, which is a few hundred miles away from Kashmir Valley. And that summer, ladies and gentlemen, was the most difficult times of our lives. That is the first summer we had to spend in the dusty Indian plains, in torn tents, and in these one-room dwellings. Now imagine a 70-year-old woman who has lived all her life in New England and is suddenly forced to live in Texas in a torn tent that does not even have a table fan. I remember this old man my family used to know. He used to live in one of these refugee camps on the outskirts of the city, on a land infested with snakes and scorpions. And he was found dead one day with a pack of chilled milk pressed against his right cheek to provide him succor from the heat. In the first year of exile, dozens of people died of sunstroke or snake bites. And we suffered from so many ailments unknown to us before. Post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, stress-induced heart diseases, hypertension, skin disease, anemia. We also realized later that the children had contracted high levels of lead poisoning because of unhygienic water supplies. In these torn tents, there was no privacy. That led to a drop in fertility rates, youngsters who delay marriage and prefer not having children. Even after 23 years of exile, we still have a high mortality rate and a low birth rate that has plunged our community in a negative growth rate. The idea of home is central to our existence. I think it's a universal sentiment. I believe in the United States also, it's a much cherished dream for every American to have a home of his own, or home of her own. And back then, when I was growing up, we had no concept of stocks or bonds or money market funds. So whatever a middle class Kashmiri family had, it was all put in that house we were building. And generations of Kashmiri Pandits had to struggle to rebuild their lives. In 1947, right after India's independence, when India became India and Pakistan, my mother's family used to live in this North Kashmir province of Baramulla, and they lost everything when the tribesmen from the northwest frontier province, aided by the Pakistani army regulars, burned down village after village. So their house at that point of time was burned to ashes. And many women were abducted and taken as slaves to be sold in the markets of Peshawar. Now, along with my father, my mother rebuilt this home in this Srinagar suburb in the 70s, and it was built by my father's retirement savings and my mother's bridal jewelry, but that too was gone in 1990. But that's not all what has been happening in Kashmir Valley in the last 23 years. In the last 23 years, more than 600 of our religious places, of our temples have been vandalized. Some of them date even before the Bamyan Buddhas. Initially what used to happen is that some of our houses would be burned down, but then those who did it realized that we would also get, in some cases, insurance claims out of these homes. So instead of burning it, they just started vandalizing it and looting away everything, including our electrical and sanitary fittings. Many houses, even after 23 years, have been forcibly occupied. And in the last few years, there's been a large-scale cultural effacement in Kashmir. Ancient names of places have been changed to erase any signs of the fact that there was this community which has lived there for thousands of years. Revenue records of temple and other lands have been changed. In the name of public utility, even the state government has grabbed our land for building police stations or widening roads. I've also mentioned that in October 1990, when most of us left, some of us stayed because they came from rural backgrounds mostly, and they had no reference to context of a life anywhere else, because in many cases they had not moved anywhere beyond 20 miles of their house. So what happened to these people who stayed back? So in March 1997. This is one of the vandalized temples in the heart of Srinagar, with ugly graffiti written on the walls. On 21st March 1997, 7 Pandit men lined outside their homes, shot dead. On 25th January 1998, the small Pandit cluster in a village in central Kashmir, all of them wiped out. 23 people, including 11 women and 2 children that you can see in the picture. Only one survivor, a young boy called Vinod Kumar Dhar, who is scarred for his life. 23 March 2003, armed men striking again, killing 24 Pandits, including 2 children, after making them sit in a common courtyard and shooting all of them in their faces. In June 1997, a young professor was dragged out of the bus along with his 2 Pandit colleagues and shot dead. His name was Ravinder. We used to call him Ravi. He was my brother. He was just 34 when he was killed, and he had an 18-month-old son. I was in Delhi when I received the news of his death, and the same night I took a bus from Delhi to be with my family. And on the outskirts of the city where my family lived, I saw his photo splashed on the front page of a newspaper. Now, in the killings of all these Kashmiri Pandits, barring one, there's not been a single conviction so far. Let me show you a small video clip of this person who goes by the name of Farooq Ahmed Dar. Also, he's called Bita Karate because he was supposedly a karate expert. He was arrested for a few years in June 1990, and he's responsible for killing of at least 20 Kashmiri Pandits. So there's an interview with done.
आपने कितने लोग भी जाने नहीं, यानी आपने इतने सारे लोग मार डाले कि आपको ये भी नहीं याद कि आपने कितने लोग मार डाले? 10-12 की 20। सारे कश्मीरी पंडित थे कि कोई मुसलमान थे उसमें? कितने मुस्लिम कितने कश्मीरी पंडित थे? ज़्यादा कश्मीरी पंडित थे। क्यों? ऐसा क्यों? अच्छा, पहला जिस आदमी को पहले आपने जान से मारा, वो कौन था? पहला कत्ल कब किया आपने? पहला कत्ल कब किया आपने? मर्डर मैंने सतीश को मारा। सतीश कौन? सतीश कुमार टिकू। कौन था ये? जो ऊपर से मतलब ऑर्डर दिया गया कि उसको एक कदम नहीं किया। कौन था ये? पंडित लड़का।
Now this person, who has confessed on television of killing more than 20 Kashmiri Pandits, released on bail after a few years, and while releasing him on the bail, and the judge remarked, and I'm quoting him, "The court is aware of the fact that the allegations leveled against the accused are of serious nature and carry a punishment of death sentence or life imprisonment. But the fact is that the prosecution has shown total disinterest in arguing this case." I won't be surprised if Farooq Ahmed Dar lands here in the United States on an Indian visa, like many other terrorists and terrorist sympathizers have done in the past. But for us Kashmiri Pandits, really, the bigger betrayal has been even bigger than the Exodus, has been this extreme state of denial that this happened in Kashmir in 1990. Many conspiracy theories have been floated in the last 2 decades about the circumstances that led to Exodus. When this book was out, this was received with a lot of criticism from Kashmir Valley. They said, "Oh no, this is all a pack of lies. These slogans were never, recited from the religious places. We never targeted you. These killings were done by the Indian state." Some of these slogans which I mentioned, we never heard them. We were in our house and we were as scared as you were. So we never heard that. And that reminds me of a story I read a few years ago in the New York Times about this Auschwitz survivor who returns to her street in Austria after 3 years, and she meets one of her neighbors on the street, and the neighbor smiles at her and says, "Oh, I haven't seen you for a long time. Where have you been?" So that is, for someone who's in exile, that is far worse than the Exodus itself, the denial of it. That our own, some of our own neighbors and friends took part in our brutalization. Now, every now and then we hear this from the Indian government or from international policy groups, and that we are making attempts for the Kashmiri Pandits to return. Yes, they will return, but they speak to us as if we are victims of an earthquake or a flood. We are victims of a political disaster, a man-made political disaster. We are victims of a religious ethnic cleansing, and that is why I say to everyone I meet, especially in countries like the United States, that the US government has cracked down recently on the Kashmiri separatist network here with the arrest of a person called Ghulam Nabi Fai. But that's not surely enough. And I believe he has shared a lot of details with the Indian government. But the Indian government back home is not doing enough to break this, break this jihadi network. The Canadian agencies have recently found out that about $300,000 had been sent to the terrorist organization Hizbul Mujahideen Kashmir Valley through an NGO called ISNA. It is this fight which I'm talking to you about. It's not only about Kashmiri Pandits. Ordinary innocent Muslims in Kashmir Valley have also been killed. There have been so many acid attacks on women. Some of them have been brutally killed by these jihadi groups operating in the valley of Kashmir. And this radicalization is destroying everything that Kashmir stood for, the tolerant strain of Sufi Islam that we experienced in Kashmir for decades. And this radicalization in Kashmir Valley is creating dangers for the entire international community, because the choice with democracies today is not to save Kashmiri Pandits, because now from our experiences we know that no jihad is localized today. So a jihadi group which is planning a terrorist strike in Kashmir may be planning a terrorist strike, God forbid, in the United States tomorrow. So it cannot be a terrorist in Boston and an unidentified gunman in Kashmir. And that's why all the democratic forces anywhere in the world must understand that the Kashmir Valley, that the state of Jammu and Kashmir, is the eastern front of war or terror. Thank you.
Take questions?
Yes, please.
No. Why don't you want to just call on people so they can raise their hands?
I think she had a question there.
No, I had a question about the.
Yes,
that
about the
morning.
poster, is it?
Yeah.
What about it?
Where did you get these posters from?
From local newspapers in Kashmir Valley.
Like this one?
Yes. This was sent to it was published in one of the newspapers there in Aftab, Daily Aftab, in Srinagar Times, and this I got from a journalist friend in Kashmir.
I don't know, but it does have spelling mistakes. Yeah,
well,
it writes kafir with a kaf, which is very,
okay.
I mean, I don't think every Muslim would write.
Okay,
like,
okay, let's.
I don't know, jihad is written as jihad.
Okay,
something
let's.
like that.
Perhaps there are mistakes in this particular
It
press
doesn't
release.
seem to be.
Well, but I got this from a journalist friend who received it in 1990 at that point of time.
Okay.
And it was used, it was published in all newspapers, in local newspapers in Kashmir in 1990, in February 1990. I had the paper cutting also, I can share it with you.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I'm Seth, I'm a PhD student at the School of Journalism, like I mentioned at the beginning. I'll first start off with a little bit of disclosure. I'm a Muslim. I'm from India, not a Kashmiri Muslim, but I'm a Muslim from India. Kashmir is a part of that country. I have known Rahul, well, not known him, but I met him 15 years ago. I was just reminding him of it. On my first day as a television journalist, I tagged along with him on the story that he was doing. He was one of the people that I've looked up to growing up as a journalist myself. I'd like to ask you to put what you've told about a very heart-rending story in the wider context of what we call the Kashmir issue in India and generally. Since the late 1980s up till now, there are estimates that 50,000 to 100,000 people have either been killed or vanished. Like conservative estimates put it at 50,000, others put it at 100,000. Almost the bulk of them are Muslims. They've been killed by Indian Army people. More specifically of the time period that you were talking about, I have heard Kashmiri Pandits say that they were actually asked to leave the valley because Jagmohan, who was the governor of Kashmir at that time, was planning a massacre of Kashmiri Muslims by the army. Now I visited Kashmir as a kid and then a couple of years ago as a tourist, so that's kind of like my personal knowledge of Kashmir. But how would you put that in the wider context of what happened within India as well as globally? When the Afghanistan war had just ended at that time, there were a lot of mujahideen who had been created but had nowhere to go to, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, just
there is, I do not speak here as a representative of the Indian state. The Indian state has been terrible in tackling certain issues, and the blame lies equally on the Indian government. For example, the Kashmiri Pandits blame the Indian government that here is this biggest democracy in the world that claims to be safeguarding the interest of religious minorities anywhere in India. But the same government failed to protect us, and I refer to you the events of 19 January 1990. There was not a single army person inside, there was not a single representative of the Indian state inside. So absolutely no. And as a journalist, I have reported extensively from Kashmir, and after this book was out, I just did a rough calculation in my head. I think in the last 15 years, I've done about 250 stories from Kashmir Valley. And about 4 of them are on the plight of Kashmiri Pandits. So there is no denying the fact that certain brutalities have happened. The numbers you quote are slightly exaggerated, but yes, thousands of them have been died, and Kashmiri Muslims only because the minority had left by then. Some of them have been killed in encounters, some of them have been killed by militants. Some of them have been terrorists who were killed at the hands of the Indian security forces. Some of them were innocent Kashmiris who just disappeared one fine day because of the operations of the Indian security agencies. Some of them were killed in cold blood, as myself and many other journalists have reported. I've had many experiences after I wrote this book. People wrote to me saying that now 23 years have passed. Now is the time to bridge the gap between two communities, Muslims and Hindus in Kashmir. And so I should not have come out with this, which they say is truth, but the truth is inconvenient. So I say, as a Kashmiri, I think there should be truth and reconciliation, and unfortunate things have happened in Kashmir Valley in 1990. But that truth and reconciliation is not going to be possible at the cost of our truth. And there is this impression I get all the time, as if one set of brutality dilutes another set of brutality. That should not be the case. Both these pains, the fact that one set of people were brutalized by the Indian state, but what I'm trying to tell you is that here's the same set of people who have brutalized another set of people who happen to be Kashmiri Pandits. So both these pains have a right to coexist. They do not have to coexist at the cost of one another. Now, as far as Jagmohan is concerned, there's been too much of exaggeration and this kite flying in the air. Let's look at things journalistically. Jagmohan was the governor of Jammu and Kashmir. He landed in Jammu city, which is about 290 kilometers, more than 200 miles from Kashmir Valley. He was stuck in his office in Jammu on the night of 19 January 1990. He used to live in that dark place. The administration had collapsed completely. And on that night, when things were happening to us, Kashmiri Pandits, he was stuck hundreds of miles away, where he was getting these calls from hapless Kashmiri Pandits to save them. And he was not the only person who was getting those calls. Virtually the who is who in the government at that point of time, the whole bureaucratic machinery was getting such calls from the frightened, scared Kashmiri Pandits. Jagmohan became a victim of this politicking between the Congress party and the party, and the party in center at that point of time. In March 1990, he issued an appeal which has appeared in every newspaper in Jammu and Kashmir, issuing an appeal to the Kashmiri Pandits that they should not leave Kashmir Valley, and if security has to be given to them, he would put them in these designated security camps across Kashmir Valley. He also issued an appeal to Kashmiri Pandits who had already left, because many of us, in fact most of us, had left by then. So he issued an appeal to them that was read, that was carried in all these newspapers, that hey, you should not live in Jammu, you should come back to Kashmir Valley, and if need be, we'll put you in these designated camps. Now, Jagmohan is portrayed, in this whole discourse as this Pied Piper of Hamelin, who just blew his pipe one day, played his pipe, and all 350,000, 400,000 Kashmiri Pandits followed him. My family, we had no contact with Jagmohan. I've never met Jagmohan until on the launch of my book in January 2013. My family had no connection with it. I know hundreds of thousands of family who have never met Jagmohan in his life or any of his representatives. We are almost 100% literate community. We have, we left because we were scared because of the events that I have just described to you. So Jagmohan may have other role to play in certain events in Kashmir after our exodus, but he has had no role to play in the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits.
There are certain echoes of the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in '48. Do you explore any of that in the book? A lot of it sounds very similar to Israeli tactics against Palestinians.
Well, my book deals with the events of Kashmir. It's interesting what happens at times, because when I wrote this book, and I've been writing about it in newspapers or blogs, etc. And sometimes there are these right-wing groups in India that they say that we should have some kind of alliance with the Israeli state. But I have very strong beliefs about that. I think as a person who was driven into exile 23 years ago, as a homeless person, I think I empathize more with the Palestinians than the current Israeli state. Anywhere else, in Bosnia, Rwanda, in Sri Lanka, I empathize with every homeless person in this world, and that's where my sympathies, my loyalty, so to speak, lies.
Were there, now, in Kashmir, were there also other Hindu communities in Kashmir which were targeted, or basically just Kashmir Pandits?
Well, the other Hindus also left. There were other communities, very small portions.
So what percentage of the Hindus are Kashmir Pandits at that time in 1999?
Almost 100%.
So
barring a few hundred families who stayed, who settled in Kashmir Valley after 1947, traveling from places like Lahore or Rahul Pandita, or people who had connection with then undivided Punjab. They settled because they had old family connections with people in Kashmir Valley, so they chose to settle there, and they were mostly traders, businessmen, other people. There are a couple of prominent Indian filmmakers who are not of Kashmiri origin, but their families have settled in Kashmir for many decades.
So earlier we talked about context, and well, we mentioned the problems of the Kashmiri Pandits.
Yes.
Right. There's a certain knee-jerk reaction to say, well, that's like the Palestinians, what happened to them in '48.
Yes.
But I wonder whether a closer analogy could not be made with what one sees happening in many other countries, like, for example, Pakistan, where as recently as 1950, about 20% of the people were non-Muslim. Today it's been reduced to about 1%.
Yes.
And one sees very similar, ethnic cleansing, forced conversions, and so on. You see the same thing in Egypt.
Right.
Coptic Christians have been leaving by the hundreds of thousands. Iraqi Christian community has been exterminated almost completely. You see this in Syria, the Syrian Christian community has been exterminated. Nigeria, you see the Boko Haram targeting the Christians and their animists.
Yes.
So why isn't that a better context for putting the travails of the Kashmiri Pandits than what happened in 1948 to the Palestinians?
Yes.
Just to say that the majority of the non-Muslims in Pakistan lived in East Pakistan. So the reduction is also, I'm not saying that the Pakistani state didn't force people to leave and there has been an exodus. Actually, in Sindh, the people who became the chief minister of Sindh didn't want the Hindu population to leave. But the majority was in East Pakistan. So the reduction that you're talking about is because of the creation of Bangladesh. Now over there, the atrocities of the Pakistani state against its own citizen, that's a different story. And the way in which what they did with the Bengali public. But so the reduction is primarily because the major population shift happens in Punjab. In '46, the riots in Bengal and Bihar already happened. But the major, when we talk about partition violence, we talk about transfer of population, displacement, killing, abduction, rape in Punjab. And that is where a city like Lahore, which has 51 or even 49% Hindu and Sikh, is sort of totally becomes, so Punjab is cleansed on both sides. Punjab is basically cleansed on both sides. So that is where the population, in Sindh, they do remain, but slowly and gradually people move. And even today, the Indian state has a clause in which Hindus and Sikhs, when they apply for citizenship or repatriation, they are allowed, Muslims are not. And even in the 80s, a lot of Hindus from Sindh moved. But I'm just trying to clarify, I'm not taking anything away from the atrocities of the Pakistani state, but Bengal was the place where the majority of the non-Muslim population was.
I think a lot of recent events have been worrying in Sindh, for example.
Absolutely. No, in the 80s, a lot of people went from Sindh. They're all in Bombay.
Thousands of Hindu families have left
Absolutely.
for Delhi, and they're not, as of now, they're not being given any facility by the
No, but they're accepted in terms of legal migration.
Nothing so far. In case of recent people, nothing so far. They're allowed to live there, etc. But in terms of legalities and office paperwork, nothing done so far. And they've been there for, some of them have been there for years now, and they live in these, languishing in these refugee camps, which the government has no role to play in. And many others, I've spoken to them there because of my work, and I believe many of them are, because there's a dearth of them getting Indian visas. Some of them are too poor to even travel to the nearest city and get visas. But most of them, want to leave that place because of.
Absolutely.
Surely,
I agree. Even in '71, there was part of the Sindh that was taken over by the Indian Army. When the borders were went back, people didn't come back. And a large percentage of that was Hindu population. They didn't come back to Pakistan. They stayed.
Yes. You mentioned the signals that the community felt early on were dismissed. And I wonder if, particularly through now your subsequent reporting and seeing communities in crisis and before crises emerge, since if you have seen any trends in some of these early warning signs that could be identified by changes in the government's behavior or militants' behavior, perhaps be identified as trends for these early warning signs across communities.
Well, now of course there are hardly any Kashmiri Pandits left, and so there is no question of us getting any kind of signal which would enable us to save ourselves. Identified houses which belong to Kashmiri Pandits, and they would identify the owners and then come to Jammu city where we lived in exile, and they would send their representatives, their middlemen, who would suddenly arrive at our doorsteps carrying with them some kind of souvenir from Kashmir Valley, because we're particularly fond of certain things which you do not get elsewhere. Now we've been getting it, but in 90s we did not get it anywhere. Like we're very fond of lotus stems, which we use as a vegetable back in Kashmir. But in Jammu city we would not get them in the 90s. So this middleman would appear at our doorstep with this souvenir or a packet of saffron, sympathize with us and say, we're also suffering, and the neighboring country is sending a lot of these people, and we have no control over them, etc., etc. And by the way, what do you want to do with your house? And it's in shambles, I must tell you, and I'm feeling very sorry for it. And I want to do something to it, but I'm getting threats. So how about selling this house to us? So in the 90s, most of us had, we're going through acute financial crisis. Because we had left everything. In my family's case, for example, we had left everything. We had to leave at that, on early morning suddenly. And for weeks, my family, for example, in exile, slept on newspaper sheets because we had nothing else. So that money was much required at that point of time. So many of us ended selling these houses to our erstwhile neighbors and friends who wanted to shift from rural areas into more livable areas in Kashmir Valley. So these houses went for peanuts. In some cases, they were just burned down, like I mentioned, or at several places where Kashmiri Pandit houses shared borders with Muslim houses, so they would not be burned because traditionally a lot of wood is used in old houses, and that would have set the entire street on fire. So what would be done is that few people would enter secretly, cut the beams of the tin roof, and in the next snowfall, the tin roof would collapse, and that would, in a few years' time, the house would be damaged completely, and then they would come to you and say, okay, I think you should sell this. In many cases, the houses were forcibly occupied. Some of the schools of the radical Jamaat Islami are run from the erstwhile Pandit houses. So many instances where different tactics have been adopted to, take away these houses from us.
Well, again, I have a disclaimer. I am Surinder Kaul. I am also a Kashmiri Pandit, and I was there when this whole thing was happening. I don't speak for, I am a physician, and human life lost is a human life lost, whether it's a Muslim, whether it's a Christian, whether it's a Kashmiri Pandit. I think the magnitude is enormous, and the thing that I like is that in spite of facing this ethnic cleansing from Kashmir, this community, which is very tolerant, 100% literacy rate, they never reciprocated violence with violence. They never picked up gun to show someone down because they want to respect humanity. So this community is suffering because it never reciprocated violence and is standing at the verge of extinction. Maybe in the next 60 years, this community will be no more. But this is an example that this community should be projected, because in many cases we see the relevance that, this section of the community was deprived and now they have taken the guns and it is justified. But no excesses on fellow community with brutal killings will be justified, even though how justifiable the cause may be. This is the only thing that I wanted to say, that we have to make the world a safer place, a civilized place, and these things defies any normal civilized humanly behaviors. That's it. Thanks.
I also have a disclaimer. I'm a Kashmiri Muslim, and I also happen to be in Kashmir during these years, during that time. I don't know, I was kind of, it's very uncomfortable it's a very uncomfortable situation for a Kashmiri Muslim to be sitting on the other side and listening to all this. And because indirectly you are being accused of being responsible. I have a comment and I also have a question to Rahul. There has been a lot of literature from the Kashmiri Muslim side and then also from the Kashmiri Hindu side, but I think this is one of the major things that have come from the Kashmiri Pandit side. And there's been a lot of contention from both ends about missing narratives or missing episodes of the other side. So for example, there are accusations that from the KP community that a lot of literature that came from the Muslim side or the Muslim narrative does not talk about the KP exodus, and it does not admit that this actually happened. And then there are also accusations that KPs also don't talk about the miseries of the Muslims, what happened to them. For example, there's one incident, like this night of January 19 and the following day, January 20, I have experienced Kashmiri Muslims, somehow they don't remember what happened to KPs. And the same thing on the other side, Kashmiri Muslims remember that day, that January 20, for a different reason. And
it's actually 21st January.
Yeah, 21st, sorry. So a day after that, when that Gaukadal thing happened, when people were, they call it the Gaukadal massacre, when people were fired, the Indian security forces had fired on them. So my question is, when you said that, and I agree with you, that accepting one for peace and reconciliation and whatever term we use, truth and reconciliation, sorry, does one suffering even out the other, or by accepting one, do you even out the other or not? So my question is, are we supposed to, what is the better approach to look at this kind of problem? Are we supposed to look at it from the whole context or from our own perspective? So what do you think is a better approach for these two communities to bridge some kind of gap and have some kind of communication back?
First of all, there's no indirect acquisition. Whatever I say has been pretty direct, and
No, I didn't say indirect. I'm saying indirect because I am also indirectly responsible.
Not accused, but yes, a significant portion of the Kashmiri Muslim population in Kashmir played a role in the brutalization of Kashmiri Pandits, or they chose to stay silent in that euphoria on the roads, because on the roads, hundreds of thousands of people, 700,000 people, 800,000 people on the roads. So for a small community of 350,000 people, that's a huge number. And we all know what happened on the night of 19 January 1990, all across Kashmir Valley. So that I think it's a little unfair on anyone who's writing the person's stories to involve everything. Like my friend, a couple of my friends, they have written Kashmiri Muslim friends. they have written about their experiences in Kashmir. You know, Basharat, for example, my friend who has written a book called Curfewed Nights from Kashmir Valley, his experience as a teenager. He's my age. So, you know, sometimes he's accused of the fact that he has not, written about the plight of Kashmiri Pandits. I think that is unfair. A memoir is technically a memoir. It is supposed to be, experience, your own personal experiences of what you went through. So his story, I think is just and fair about what he felt as a Kashmiri Muslim, growing up in a militarized state in the 90s. So I have no grudge against him, the fact that he did not write about Kashmiri Pandits. And it's similar about my book. You know, my book is a memoir, like his was, and it is strictly about what my family went through, or other Kashmiri Pandit families went through. I don't think I can speak on everyone's behalf, but I think the Kashmiri Pandit community has never denied that certain things have happened in Kashmir. For example, Kunan Poshpura. I've never heard a Kashmiri Pandit say, "Oh no, this is all lie. Kunan Poshpura never happened," or a Gao Kadal massacre never happened. But that is not the case with the majority of the Kashmiri Muslim community in Kashmir, who, like I said, are in extreme denial. Who even say till now, this, the main popular conspiracy theories. I still go and I'll be driven around by a young Muslim driver, and he'll sympathize with me and we'll talk, because the language is such an important factor. Language-wise, you feel so close. Sometimes when I go to Kashmir and I speak in my own mother tongue, and I discover these words which I never thought existed before. So that's a very important thing. But all of a sudden, then you have this. Oh, we had such a wonderful time, but to hell with Jagmohan. He made you flee. Then you just keep silent about it, because you're having a fine conversation and there's nothing. I mean, we cannot sort out the Kashmir issue there in his cab itself. So you remain silent about it. So there are these embarrassing silence with friends who have grown up with me, and we meet and we hug each other, and we'll have a drink somewhere in some dark corner, because alcohol is, as you know, is strictly prohibited, and they can't be seen drinking alcohol there. So all that remains. But coming back to your question, I think, I'm all for truth and reconciliation. But the first step, really, and without that, from my own experience, I can tell you the reconciliation is never going to happen unless there is a complete consensus on the circumstances that led to the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits. So there has to be this acceptance on the part of the majority population in Kashmir that, okay, we're having this fight with the Indian state, but you became unnecessary targets of this fight, and you were brutalized, you were killed, your temples were vandalized, you were brutally killed, you were raped, you were maimed, you were driven like cattle out of your homes, you were uprooted for 23 years, which is almost quarter of a century. And looking at the circumstances in Kashmir Valley, there is absolutely no chance in future of our return in any form.
Last question.
So much of the literature on the Kashmir, the domestic portion of the Kashmir crisis, has talked about the early movement for Kashmiri independence led by the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front as including not only Muslims but Hindus as well, and that it was in over the course of years that in some sense this movement became hijacked by extremists. And similarly, there's a great deal of emphasis on the Kashmir of the past as in Kashmiriyat, this kind of fusion, particularly between Sufi Islam and Hinduism. And somehow, from your talk, I get the sense that maybe this is a facade, something of a created myth, and that the animosity, at least toward the Hindu pundits, goes back a long way and was much more widespread than some of the literature would suggest.
Well, yes. A couple of things. No Hindu was ever part of the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. you're perhaps referring to earlier times when there was an organization called Muslim Conference.
No, I'm not. No, I'm thinking of the JKLF. There were at least people trying to say that there were initially Hindus among. No,
not really.
Okay.
No. Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front is now promoting itself as a secular organization, and you have these former terrorists who come and visit us when we go visiting our shrines, and they embrace us for a photo opportunity where they make their regular noises every year that Kashmir is incomplete without Kashmiri Pandits. But these initial wave of brutal killings which I mentioned to you, including the killing of Gizjatiku or this person you saw, they're all from Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front. So they took an active part in our killings. In fact, the majority of killings of the Kashmiri Pandits, more than 700 people, were killed by the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front in the 90s. The answer to your second question is both yes and no. Well, we have had our good times, especially my father's generation. They had a fairly peaceful life, and like I said, we have a very long history of religious persecution that goes to hundreds of years. But in our lifetimes, or in the lifetimes of our fathers, we had such peaceful, wonderful times. And every now and then, like I said, the peace would be broken, and the tranquility of it would seem as a facade, as you mentioned. But then it's not very easy to leave a land where your forefathers have lived for thousands of years. So we would somehow prevail, and throughout these years, migrations have happened. People who could not face it any longer, the Kashmiri Pandits, they have left. In 1947, Kashmir Valley constituted of about 15% Hindus. In the next few years, they were only reduced to 5%. So these migrations have happened in bits and pieces. But the final nail was really driven in 1991. When the gun came and this whole euphoria on the streets, an example of which is the night of 19th January 1990, we were absolutely left. And it's a small community, and everyone is looking at, okay, this person has died, okay, I don't know him, so maybe I'll be safe. Okay, this person has died somewhere else, okay, I don't know him, maybe I'll be safe. And then the tragedy hits you closer home. Oh, he used to go to my office, I've known him for so many years. He went to college with me, he was my neighbor, he was my cousin. And without telling anyone in those dark days, you would just lock up your house one early morning and just get the hell out of there. And after you migrated and after you went to safe places, then you would sort of reassemble and take stock of your life. Okay, he has also left, he has also left. It was like, those were really dark times for us.
I have a comment to that. I think most of the people who were seen as a threat to the freedom movement were targeted, but KPs were targeted as a community. There were also other communities, minority communities like Shias were also targeted. I mean, there was, like you said, the slogans. I have heard slogans like Kırfız Paçe, Revzaslar. So those things also were there. I mean, Shias were also targeted for a long time initially, and anyone who was seen as a threat was targeted, but maybe KPs were targeted as a community. I don't know if there was this, it was an organized plan, but
well, it was
that
organized.
also,
you see, 700 people killed in such brutal fashion.
Yeah,
and they were not government servants, as I've said. Housewives, pregnant
there were
women,
several occasions when
housekeepers.
Lots of people were killed.
Yes, and you're right about Shia. And
We had to. I belong to a Shia community, and we had to flee our house several times because we were also scared.
Yes.
And when you were talking about the night of 19th January, I don't actually remember what happened. I remember that people were on rooftops. They were beating. In fact, I would admit that I was also one of the people. I was just a kid, and I was also banging. I didn't know what's going on. It was just a frenzy that everybody was banging their rooftops and asking for azadi. And like slogans. I don't know. I mean, just
Well,
I mean, I don't.
Well,
I
so,
haven't-
well,
it
so
was
what can I say
totally-
except that
Can I
maybe
make
you
it
were
a
too
small
busy
scale?
banging the tin roof.
Like people were, it was people
Kids,
were like frantic. This was just like a madness. Everybody was on the rooftops. People were making slogans. They were. It was dark. There was. I mean, they had switched their lights off. I don't remember. It wasn't. Was it a blackout or something?
So what were you
Just-
told when you were doing these things?
I don't know. Everybody was. I mean, they were like trying to scare the Indian security forces. So we were banging our rooftops.
Are you not
because
shouting any
everybody
slogans
was-
against Kashmiri Pandits?
No, I was not. Absolutely not.
So you were
No.
part of that January
I don't know,
1990
everyone
banging the doors and making noise, right?
Banging our own rooftops.
Correct, right. That is
because
what
people were scared. I mean, even we were scared. I don't know, because we were told that the security people are going to, they're going to have a mass operation. We were told. I don't know who spread those lies. That's what we were told. We were told that they're going to have a mass operation. And I don't know who spread those lies. I have no idea.
Yeah, I say that this is what we call as medical terms denial.
No, excuse me. Here.
I don't
The
know. I
point
mean,
is
I
that
don't. I have
the
also
story
been-
that has been told
I'm
is,
just telling you
is
my story.
absolutely heart-wrenching. But to say that a people who feel rightly or wrongly under occupation, and they have different ways of expressing their agitation and anger at occupation, which may and has been, as you, Rahul, pointed, was directed at a particular community, but it can also be about a community that felt under occupation for whatever historical narrative and trying to sort of, and a kid of 8 or 9 years old sort of being asked to bang their thing. I mean, you can't say that she's in denial. I mean, heaven's sake.
No,
Point is like, it's not her responsibility. I mean, kids are doing things which everyone is, it's a mass moment. I'm not, so please, I mean, you can't sort of psychologize this into some kind of
As I said, we
I
had
wish
to
it
leave
had
our house
restricted
also.
to banging only, but when
Well,
it is
it wasn't.
supplemented with rapes,
It
killings,
wasn't. Rahul has
this
Yes,
is what
of
is
course.
defined
I
as
mean,
massachusetts.
when the state machinery is not working,
But that is
when there's
unfair.
total breakdown of the state
doesn't
machinery,
follow.
nobody's in control. People just go rioting,
And we
And
all
this
have
is
to
not in a
remember
vacuum.
that we all have to
This is
remember
not
that
happening in a
India
vacuum.
is the largest democracy. It has the ways to settle the issues. There are lots of issues in other parts of the state, not only in Kashmir, but they are talking, there is dialogue, and with dialogue, solutions come out. But there is no radicalization. There is no gun culture. There is no.
What happened in Gujarat
No, are
doesn't
you
happen.
saying that the
Heaven's sake,
majority of
don't-
the people are have guns? I
In
mean, I
Kashmir
never-
at that
I have
at that
never-
time, I didn't say whatever percentage of people had guns, they were successful in creating a scare.
My father
With the
was
result,
kidnapped. My
even
father
the
was
good
kidnapped at
Muslims
gunpoint.
couldn't do anything,
That's
even
the
if they
whole
wanted. That is the point
My
that
friend's
I- you
father
know,
was
the-
killed
the-
in front
the-
of us.
the-
His brain
the-
was on the road.
The
and this was a Muslim,
the
so
next
it's
target,
not-
Yeah,
the
I
next
think
target in
everybody was
Kashmir
involved.
is going to be Shia community.
No, I'm not just talking about
exactly
Shias. I mean, Shias
It's going to
also
be
were- but
Pakistan model. Really.
anyone who was
No,
seen
it's
as-
what happened in World War II. They said first they came for the Jews,
Yeah,
we did
absolutely.
nothing. Then they came
Yes.
for, it just goes on like that.
Yeah.
The next targets, you're exactly right, are in fact right now the Shias, both in Pakistan and in Kashmir.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You look at what is happening. Every day, gunmen killing these people. And there are, people from our community, Shia community, they are scared in Kashmir Valley.
But they also, I mean, yeah, that is, I mean, I would say that's yes and no, because there are also Shias in the, I mean, they also joined. Shias also joined eventually the free, not everybody, but some people did join the movement, so-called
There have
movement,
been some cases. but-
for various reasons. So maybe some
but
joined because
largely,
they did not
sometimes,
have a choice.
there are
They
these
didn't
monsters
want
you
to-
create and they strike
They
back
didn't
at
want
you.
to be.
Can you do about it?
I mean, they had to live there, so they didn't want. They didn't-
Exactly. This
for
is what
example,
is it.
Yeah, and for example, for Kashmiri Pandits, they thought India was, they associated themselves with India, but for Kashmiri Muslim Shias, they probably did not have that kind of thing to associate with.
Sorry, Sada, we could not have waited.
No, I'm not saying that, no.
To join and wait
I'm
for
not
our
saying that.
brutalization. 350,000 people, out there on the road being brutalized by their own neighbors. dragged from their, dragged
No, I think,
dragged
no, I
with
don't,
jeeps.
I agree with you only partly
brutalization.
because
We could not have waited
you
to
seem
join the Azadi
project it
movement.
as
in
if,
Kashmir.
that everybody was involved.
That's not
which
done.
is not
If I may jump in here, I maybe again we're kind of providing disclaimers, but I happen to be a Kashmiri Pandit too. I left Kashmir to study, to go to college in 1987, and so I was not personally there, but I do happen to be of a family one of the very few families that still live in Kashmir. My mother still lives in Srinagar and has lived through this whole thing, not just what happened in 1919, what happened in 1989, 1990, and onwards. She's lived through all of that. I think that the issue of Kashmir is not, it's very complex. It is very complex. I think Rahul mentioned early on in his presentation that the two communities coexisted very well, fairly well. I remember a wonderful time growing up in Kashmir. Lived among Hindu neighbors and Muslim neighbors, and those neighbors are still there when I visit Kashmir every year, which I do. I still go visit them, they come over. So the personal relationships, and I think all of us here, all the Kashmiri Pandits here would probably agree with me, I'm not going to speak for everyone, the personal relationships were great, one-on-one. But I still, when I go back to Kashmir and I talk to these neighbors, these are people that I've grown up with. And my kids are friends with their kids. It's really an interesting kind of dichotomy. Sadaf, when we talk about this and we discuss, I haven't personally had those discussions, but when we talk about what happened in 1990 and for the next few years, either there's absolutely no conversation about that because it makes everyone uncomfortable, understandably, for reasons that you've mentioned, Sadaf, that people who may not have been directly involved in that, but kept quiet, stood on the sidelines and didn't do anything.
Because they also were afraid for their lives.
No denying that, but I'm going to paraphrase a quote that I read a while ago, that by standing on the sidelines and not doing anything does not absolve people of the responsibility of what happened. And that is the narrative, I think, what I take away from Rahul's book. That is the narrative. I still go back, I still have those relationships that we have with people, but now the perspective is different, and it's a very complex situation. It's hard to kind of get your arms around the whole thing. And it's we can sit and have these discussions all day long about what happened and what should have happened. But at the end of the day, there is denial, and it does not absolve people who were not involved in it of the responsibility. So
I think it's quite interesting when some of us go to Kashmir, and some of us have recently been going to Kashmir. I, of course, have been going from day one. It's interesting because I have compared notes with other people, and it's the same experience all of us Kashmiri Pandits have who travel to Kashmir every now and then. So at the airport, you have this person who you've known for some time, and he'll be a cabbie, or he'll pick you up from there. Then you'll go to a hotel or to some guest house, and you'll stay there, and people there. Then you'll go visit your neighbors, erstwhile neighbors, or your friends, or your colleagues who have worked with you at one point of time. Or you'll go to these shops where you do a little bit of shopping to keep that memory of Kashmir alive in terms of carpets and rugs, etc. And invariably, every time you go there, the first question, and it's not something which they do deliberately, it's something which happens, it works subconsciously. The first question, or maybe the second at best, is, till when are you going to be here? So as long as you are going there and staying in, contributing to the local economy, staying in these fancy hotels, or travel in the houseboats, or buying their stuff, rugs and carpets, and it's absolutely no problem at all. So you do your farewell maybe 2 weeks later or a week later, and it's a tearful farewell at the airport again or at the bus stand. But the moment you make a very faint conversation about that you may want to settle back and buy a piece of land, or you're looking for a foothold in terms of a government job or something, then there are these wide gorges that come in between. In 2008, the Indian Prime Minister announced a package for the Kashmiri Pandits, a return of Kashmiri Pandits. And he said that some of you who want to join these government jobs in Kashmir Valley are most welcome to go there. So we have many people who are still in refugee camps, and they are living in extremely horrible conditions. Some of them are getting a dole which is even lower than the Indian Planning Commission's ridiculous definition of below poverty line. So some of them really badly needed these government jobs. So 1,416 young men and women, some of them who have never stayed in Kashmir, who were born in exile, went back, and they were put in these 5 designated camps set up by the state government on the central government money, because the state government does not spend a penny on the welfare of Kashmiri Pandits. All the money comes from New Delhi. And you should look at the kind of experience they are having. Security is the last of their concern. The main concern is the kind of harassment and discrimination they are facing at the hands of their Muslim colleagues in government offices and schools. I met young women who had to be hospitalized because of the kind of treatment meted out to them, not by the Indian government or by the separatist groups or militant groups, but by their own colleagues in offices. Many of them have left back; they have returned, leaving those jobs there. So it's much more than denial. It is something that they never want us back there, and that's a fact.
Well, so our time has come to an end. I don't know if you had any further closing remarks you wanted to make, and also Vijay, if you all wanted to.
No, I was going to say we normally have a department presentations here. They are so boring. So Rahul, you brought a lot of excitement in this room. I have never seen Keshav talk, Kamran talk. You brought a lot of excitement.
Oh, I've never been here.
We'll have to fix that problem. So.
I have a way to make peace, because as a white Christian American citizen who has no historical tie to any of the communities here, this theme of denial, I think it's important. Aggrieved communities often manipulate history to make sense of their own injuries, but also dominant communities engage in far deeper denial. The United States of America is still in deep denial about the genocide against indigenous people that created this country and against the most recent crimes in Iraq and around the world. This denial, it's easy to point fingers, but I think it's important to recognize what denial means, especially when it's at the hands of the world powers, where it obliterates history completely and makes the possibility of peace very, very difficult.
Well, with that remark, I think we have a lot of sweet cookies there.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.